The film opens with our amazing Amy resting her head on her husband Nick's lap as he wonders what's going inside her head. Scenes transition to Nick visiting his twin sister Margot in a bar he co-owns with her. With a gloomy expression, he shares that it's his 5th anniversary with Amy. Scenes cut to Amy's side of the story, who starts writing a journal on her love life. She begins narrating the day she was first approached by Nick at a party. She was captivated by his wit and charm, which led her to hang out with Nick outside, where they first shared a kiss outside a sugar factory and became lovers. In the current time, Nick stays longer at the bar with Margot. When he returns home, he spots the living room table overturned with its glass shattered and Amy gone. Scenes cut to the cops pulling outside his house upon his calling. Officer Jim and Detective Rhonda inspect the place further and find a bloodstain on the kitchen counters. Rhonda looks at a book cover framed on the living room walls called The Amazing Amy. She claims to know Amy as her author parents have captured her entire life in a book series. Scenes cut to a flashback of Amy angrily writing about her book version, Amazing Amy, always being the perfect one, who is now getting married. Amy attends the new sequel's opening ceremony with Nick. She sits down with the reporters who don't hesitate to ask her insensitive questions about not getting married in real life. To cheer her up, Nick shows up as a fake reporter and starts asking her sweet questions. As she blows his cover by kissing him, scenes kick back in reality. Nick is brought to the police station to file an official report on Amy's disappearance. When he appears clueless of most of the questions asked about Amy, especially her blood type and friend circle, Jim and Rhonda begin suspecting him of being apathetic and disinterested in Amy's disappearance. Nick frustratingly calls his in-laws to update them on Amy's disappearance. There, Nick comes across his mentally ill father being in police custody, who was found roaming the streets. Nick drops him back at the old house. In another flashback, Amy writes about her and Nick still being madly in love after 2 years of being married. For their anniversary, they make love in the library aisles and give each other sentimental presents. In the current timeline, Nick returns to Margot's place to stay the night as his house is under open investigation. Meanwhile, Nick and Amy's pregnant neighbor, Noelle, approaches Rhonda during the investigation at night and pretends to show concerns for Amy, who she calls her best friend. During the investigation, Rhonda finds out everything Nick owns is under her name, even the shares of his bar. They realize she can be a manipulator and a dominator. They further find an envelope in the drawer labeled as Clue 1. The next day, Nick is woken up by Margot, who works on his appearance and asks him to look tired and worrisome so the cops don't doubt him again. Nick and Margot head to the police station where Amy's parents have arrived from New York, hoping things will get better. They hold an official press conference there to let the readers know of real Amy's mysterious disappearance. Nick is brought forward to make the announcement and ask the public to help them find her. He involuntarily smirks a little and appears uninterested because of how things were getting bad with Amy. But the media mistakes his smirk for something else and makes him look like the bad guy. When the parents sit down to give their statement, they reveal Amy's history of crazy exes who caused dramas when Amy dumped them. One of them is Desi Collins, who tried committing suicide in college 20 years ago when Amy dumped him. Another one is Tommy, who got very physical and abusive when Amy dumped him. When they are dismissed and free to leave, Rhonda brings Nick back and shows him the clue envelope. He opens it and cracks a riddle, which leads them to his office, where Rhonda discovers a woman's panty and the second clue, which leads to a brown house. Nick pretends not to crack the clue and later shows up at his father's old residence, where Rhonda follows him and finds the third clue. Nick immediately drives back home to avoid Rhonda. The third clue hints at their 5th anniversary, which exposes Amy's deliberate teasing. In another flashback, Amy comforts Nick upon getting laid off from work. However, Nick doesn't cope well when she tells him she's also getting laid off and returning her entire trust fund to her parents so they can clear their debts. A few weeks later, Amy passes remarks on Nick's impulsive and overspending habit, which provokes Nick to be rude. Amy remains silent and composed, which weakens their bond. In the present, Nick joins the people who are volunteering to look for Amy. He spots the crazy Desi and the volunteers, who walks away instead of greeting Nick. A woman also takes a selfie with him outside, in which he smiles. He finds from Margot that Amy's mother is mad at him, so he follows her outside and tries to tell her he's asked to be a gentleman with the people who are helping them find Amy. After the first day of the search, Rhonda returns to Amy's residence to dig deeper. Noelle shows up again, but Rhonda asks the officers to send her away. On the second day of the search, the people grow in number and the case goes viral. Margot watches a media reporter use Nick's last selfie he took with a woman to declare him uninterested in his wife's disappearance, Back to Amy's journal, she is frustrated yet well composed to share that Nick and she have moved back to Nick's congested hometown to look after Nick's breast cancer-ridden mother. She expresses that Nick has stopped prioritizing her, and she can feel the love fade away. In the present, Nick's much younger girlfriend named Andy shows up at Margot's place to see Nick in secret, so he tells her to keep their relationship a secret until the dust settles. The flashback continues in which Nick's mother dies, and he starts living there. Amy uses her last reserves to buy him a bar. With time, their marriage grows stale. One night, she stops him from going out and plans to have a baby for a new start, but Nick becomes agitated and even physically assaults her to the point she gets scared of him. In the present, Rhonda finds from her source junkie that Amy came to buy a gun from him. Following this, Amy's confession reveals why she bought a gun to feel protected from Nick. In the present, Andy sneakily walks out of the house, but Margot watches her and has a fight with Nick over this. Angry, Nick returns to his place. In the police station, Rhonda is told that the forensics lit up the kitchen with luminol and found an entire pool of blood washed from the kitchen floors. The blood type also matches Amy. As the case has gone viral and people are curious, the family holds a vigil for Amy to update the public. There, Noelle causes a scene by telling Nick Amy was 6 weeks pregnant. Nick gets provoked, so the cops take him away. Inside the house, Nick swears they never spoke with Noelle, but Rhonda shows him pictures that Noelle gave to prove her friendship. She also tells him about the blood reports they found, as well as the credit card expenses. They also found that Nick increased Amy's life insurance earlier this year. He denies everything, which makes him look even more suspicious. When Margot arrives later, Nick shares that Amy made him go to a fertility clinic to check his sperm. He later sent her to collect the sample, which he assumes Amy used to get pregnant. She becomes upset and leaves the house, which is surrounded by media and cops. Later, Nick tries to crack Amy's last riddle, while Rhonda checks his father's house and finds Amy's burnt diary in the basement. From what they salvage, they discover Amy was afraid Nick might kill her. Nick also cracks the clue and runs to Margot's shed to discover all the purchases she made from her card. Scenes cut to Amy in the present, who's running away in a rental car. She narrates her evil scheme from the beginning. Tired of Nick's attitude, she started seeing police documentaries to stage her own kidnapping and made friends with Noelle to spread fake rumors about Nick being abusive. She gets Nick drunk to up her insurance and max out her credit card under his name. She further steals Noelle's urine to fake her pregnancy in her medical reports, so all things point to Nick when she disappears. She finally orchestrates the final phase of her plan in Nick's absence. She ransacks the table and draws her blood cautiously, which she then splatters all over the kitchen. She makes sure she does a poor job of cleaning it so the forensics can find traces later. She also puts her blood on a mallet and hides it in their fireplace. She tosses her diary in the furnace and stores the electronics in Margot's shed before fleeing. She admits leaving a clue at their father's place so the cops can find her diary there. To disguise herself, she now changes her hair entirely and buys some groceries before heading to her hideout. She pays in cash and books a room under the name Nancy. While settling in the new hotel room, she justifies her framing because Nick drove her to bankruptcy and left her for a younger girl. She checks her pouch of money to make sure it's safe. This way, no one can trace her from her purchases. She stoops to a next level of crazy when she smashes her cheekbones to change the facial harmony. Meanwhile, Margot and Nick find a present box in the shed along with the electronics. The gift box has dolls in it and a clue, which helps them crack that the dolls are missing their mallet. The next day, Amy visits an internet cafe to check on the news and gloat about how well her plan is being executed. She returns and befriends her next-door neighbor, Greta, with whom she overshares the story of how she found Nick kissing Andy outside the sugar factory he once took her to. Back on Nick's side, he flies to New York to hire a lawyer named Tanner Bolt, who's aware of how he's being framed. He also meets Amy's ex, Tommy, who exposes Amy for framing him too and getting him convicted of abuse, just because she found out about his affair. Greta and her partner spend time with Amy in the meantime. Nick calls Margot to tell her he's going to meet Desi next and also worries about Tanner's fee. Margot assures she'll support him financially. Simultaneously, both siblings discover that the media is putting a preposterous accusation on them for having an incestuous relationship. Greta also watches the news imposing the death penalty on Nick. Amy is seen keeping track of her calendar of pointers she left for the cops to discover. She also calls the cops anonymously to report strange activity in Margot's shed. Nick sees Desi, who is just as psychotic as Amy. Nick doesn't get much out of him and leaves. He's unable to visit his own bar as the media and curious people await him. Rhonda keeps going through Amy's diary and wondering why Nick disposed of her diary at his father's house. The next day, Tanner flies to Nick's town and gives all sorts of legal advice to him and Margot, who also take him out to eat. That night, Amy's money pouch falls by mistake while playing golf with Greta and her man. She starts to feel unsafe in the room at night. The next day, Tanner advises Nick to confess the truth on television as it's the fastest way of letting people hate him and then forget about him. On the contrary, Greta and her man turn out to be bandits who assault Amy and steal all her cash. Left with no option, she's seen contacting someone using a local payphone. Back in Missouri, Margot and Tanner mentally prepare Nick in the makeup room before the interview. Meanwhile, Amy is seen meeting up with Desi, who extremely sympathizes with her as she continues to play the victim card. Just before Nick's interview, the reporter discovers something shocking. Amy and Desi also discover the same shock when they watch the naive Andy confessing in a public conference her affair with Nick, who's trying to silence her. Tanner tries to talk Nick out of the interview, but he wants to get it over with. Scenes cut to Tanner driving Nick back home. Desi still has feelings for Amy, so he shelters her in one of his safe houses and shows her around. Desi tries to kiss her before leaving, but she appears reluctant. The next day, she discovers the entire house packed with surveillance cameras and Desi spawning from behind her with new goods for her. She can feel his obsessive phase return and feels stuck there. The following evening, Nick rushes to Margot's house while being chased by the media. There, he watches his interview while Amy watches it with Desi at his place. Nick has surprisingly done well in the interview as he's owned up to his mistakes with shame and confessed to how worried he is for Amy. As the interview finishes, Rhonda shows up at Margot's place with a search warrant and discovers the electronics in her shed that were purchased with Amy's credit card. She arrests Margot for this, while Desi continues to verbally manipulate Amy into becoming his partner, for he has looked after her. Now Nick is brought to the police station alongside Tanner. Rhonda shows him pages of Amy's diary about the abuse, but Nick falsifies them as he's never abused Amy ever. Rhonda also shows him the mallet Jim discovered from the fireplace, which compels Rhonda to arrest him too. The following day, Desi starts visiting Amy more often, which suffocates her. The next day, she orchestrates a new plan. She soaks the lower half of her shirt in red wine to make it look like she's been sexually assaulted and pretends to cry in front of the cameras moments before Desi arrives. Meanwhile, Nick and Margot get bailed out with Tanner's influence. He drives them through the heavy crowd. Now following his case. Next, Amy molests herself with a wine bottle and waits for Desi's arrival. When he shows up, she offers herself to him and takes him to his bed, where she slashes open his throat with a box cutter and pretends to be defending herself from him. Scenes cut to Nick discovering Amy soaking in blood outside the house as the media continues to picture her. She falls in his arms dramatically as he brings her back inside. When she wakes up in the hospital, she puts up an innocent face and pins her abduction on Desi, her crazy lover whom she had to kill in self-defense after the sexual assault. Rhonda secretly doubts her entire story. Nick brings her back home while everyone follows them.
Excuse us, folks.
Nick tries to interrogate her, but she refuses to answer until she makes him get in the shower and confirm he's not wearing a police wire. She admits to her entire evil scheming and dumping her botched attempts to punish Nick on Desi to get away with her crimes. This officially makes Nick hate her to the core. The next day, Amy makes her first public appearance with Nick and forces him to smile and act happy in front of the cameras. Nick shares Amy's confession with Margot, Tanner, and Rhonda, but unfortunately, he lacks the evidence to prove himself. When he returns home, Amy manipulates him by being nice and inclines him to sleep on the bed with her. The next day, Nick is all prepared to expose her in an interview at their house. But Amy pulls the last trick up her sleeve and shows Nick the positive pregnancy test to tether him with her forever and stop him from exposing her in the interview. Nick pushes her against the wall angrily, now knowing her manipulative schemes. He surrenders and doesn't expose Amy in the interview, who happily announces her pregnancy. Margot tears up to realize Amy has clawed Nick again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe for more awesome recaps.